Why would two men try to drown each other for fun? You think you know what extreme sports look like? You have no idea. Imagine a game of baseball, but instead of a bat, you have a war club. Instead of a referee, you have a guy sharpening his axe on the sidelines. And if you get angry at the pitcher, you don't charge the mound, you kill him. We tend to think of Vikings as these grim warriors who spent all their time raiding or farming, right? But they had a lot of downtime, especially during those long, dark winters. So, how did the toughest people in history blow off steam? Spoiler alert, they didn't play Monopoly. To understand Viking games, you have to understand their mindset. For us, a game is an escape from reality. It's safe, it's regulated. For a Viking, a game was just a rehearsal for war. If you weren't bleeding by the end of it, you probably weren't trying hard enough. Let's start with the one that sounds the most innocent on paper. Knattleikr. It translates to ball game. Sounds cute, right? Like something you'd play at a picnic? Wrong. This was absolute carnage. Historians are still arguing about the exact rules because the sagas usually skip the rulebook and just describe the injuries. It was likely played on a frozen pond or a flat field. 2 teams, wooden bats, and a hard ball. Sounds like hockey or cricket? Keep listening. In the sagas, we read about players getting frustrated and just hitting their opponents in the head with the bat. And that wasn't a foul, that was just part of the game. There's a famous story about the warrior Egil Skallagrimsson. When he was just a kid, 6 or 7 years old, he lost a game of Knattleikr. He got so mad that he put an axe through the other kid's head. And the adults didn't arrest him. They praised him for having a warrior's spirit. That is the level of intensity we are talking about. But what if you wanted something more personal, one-on-one? Then you played Glima. This is Viking wrestling, and believe it or not, it's actually the national sport of Iceland today. But the modern version is very polite. You hold each other's belts and try to trip the other guy. The Viking version? Not so polite. They had a variation called loose grip wrestling, where anything went. You could break fingers, gouge eyes, and slam your opponent onto the frozen ground until they couldn't stand up. It was a way to settle arguments without drawing swords, although sometimes drawing a sword would have been quicker and less painful. But here is where it gets really dark. I mentioned drowning earlier. I wasn't joking. Vikings were obsessed with swimming, but they didn't race laps in a heated pool. They competed in drowning contests. The goal wasn't to swim the fastest, it was to hold your opponent underwater for as long as possible. Think about that. You are in the freezing cold North Atlantic Ocean. You grab your friend and you shove him under the water. He fights back, trying to shove you under. The winner is the guy who can hold his breath the longest while wrestling a desperate man in freezing water. People died playing this, regularly. In the sagas, there are accounts of men staying under for so long that onlookers thought they were both dead. When they finally surfaced, they were exhausted, half frozen, but the winner got bragging rights that could last a lifetime. It really highlights the contrast between our world and theirs. We have referees to stop the fight when it gets dangerous. They had onlookers who cheered louder when it got dangerous. But it wasn't all broken bones and hypothermia. They had mental games too. Have you ever seen a game called Hnefatafl? It's often called Viking chess, but that's a bad comparison. Chess is a fair fight. Both sides have the same pieces. Hnefatafl is unfair by design. The board is set up with a king in the very center, surrounded by a handful of defenders. Around the edges of the board, a massive army of attackers. The king is outnumbered 2-1. His only goal is to escape to a corner. The attacker's only goal is to capture him. It's not a simulation of a battle, it's a simulation of an ambush. It taught Viking leaders that life isn't fair. You will be outnumbered. You will be surrounded. You have to think your way out of a hopeless situation. And then, of course, there were the drinking games. But even these were combat. You didn't just sit around and chug ale. You engaged in flyting, essentially a rap battle, but with way more death threats. You would insult a man's courage, his family, his appearance, and his manhood, all in verse. If you stumbled over your words or couldn't come up with a clever comeback, you lost. And in a society based entirely on reputation, losing a battle of words could be just as damaging as losing a battle of swords. So why did they do this? Why make every aspect of life, even the fun parts, so incredibly brutal? Because the world they lived in was brutal. The cold, the starvation, the raids. Weakness was a death sentence. Their games weren't designed to distract them from that reality. They were designed to harden them against it. They played rough so that when the real fight came, they wouldn't hesitate. Looking at all of these, the bone-breaking ball games, the drowning contests, the ambush board games, it makes modern sports look a little soft, doesn't it? If you had to choose one of these to play for a day, knowing the risks, which one do you think you'd actually survive? Tell me in the comments.